Hey guys, it's Sid. I'm back with another one, and this time I want to show you everything you need to know about pivot tables. So pivot tables are one of those essential need to know features and structures within Excel. They're pretty much a bread and butter type of feature. Like, you really need to know these and really get good at knowing these if you want to be good at analyzing and showcasing your data analysis skills. So with pivot tables, the best thing about pivot tables is it allows you to summarize your data, essentially group your data. So if you've got a large data set or a large data file or data table, you can really consolidate that down into meaningful results by certain themes or dimensions. Pivot tables are not just good for analyzing data, but they're actually very good for presenting data as well, in the form of a dashboard, in the form of a ready-made report for a customer, a client, or one of your colleagues or managers. And they're also really good for embedding into PowerPoint as well. So I'll show you all this and more in this video. Please stay tuned. Hope you like it. Let's get started. Right guys, let's make a start with this. So firstly, I want you to go to Google and we're going to search for some data that we're going to use to create and essentially test our pivot tables with. So for this exercise, type into Google Kaggle. Kaggle is a major data website, and it'll take you to kaggle.com as your first result. And I want you to search for a data set. If you click on data sets, I want you to search for world's best employers. And that should bring up this result right here. I'll put a link in the video description, but if you want to do this manually, you can do it this way. Kaggle, I'll do a separate video on what Kaggle is, but Kaggle is a data science platform. It's a place where you can learn everything you want about data, coding. You can take part in competitions and much more. We'll cover that in a separate video. But for this purpose, we want to click on this link here, and we want to essentially download this data file. You may have to register with Kaggle. I've already got a profile. It shouldn't take long. So you click on download. It's a 2 kilobyte file. I'll go into it in a moment. It's not a large file, to be honest. And it'll go straight to your downloads folder. You just want to open that up. And this is what it should look like. World's best employers. So once we open this up, I've already got it open actually. So here you can see this is what our file looks like. It's a single tab file. It's got what looks like a rank of companies going all the way down to 100 companies. And these look like the largest world top best, as you see here, world's best employers. I'm not sure how they've ranked that exactly, but that's not a problem. So first thing you want to do before we actually get into creating a pivot table, you want to kind of tidy this up. So what I normally do is highlight everything, the top left cell here, and then just center everything. And then all I want to do is just get a sense of the data, make sure it's looking okay, make sure there's nothing broken. I don't want to see loads of empty blank columns or rows really, although it can still, it's not a problem if we want to create a pivot table using data which is not in the cleanest format. So what we want to do now to create our very first pivot table is to essentially select the data which is going to be pivoted. To do that, you want to highlight all the columns. So I've only got all the columns up to E. And if you want to go down really quickly, if you hold the shift icon and then you hold control and press down, you'll be able to go all the way down to the bottom to the 101st row. So that's using shift and control. Then you want to go into insert, and this is where you put in pivot table. But before that, I want you guys to do something completely different. In terms of best practice, creating a pivot table from a set of columns and rows is not best practice. And essentially the reason being is because Excel doesn't know how you're sourcing your data until you give it a tabular structure. So what I'm trying to say is, before you create a pivot table, create a table first. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go insert, and we're going to insert a table first. And this just asks whether your table values are in the following columns and rows, which is correct. We go from column A to column E, from cell 1 to cell 100, from row 1 to 101. And our table has headers, basically means that it ignores the first column. Click OK to that, and what you have now is a table. Now, why is that important? Because when it comes to updating this data again in future, we'll add some data to this. We'll add a couple extra rows. Excel has a much easier time understanding a table instead of some empty columns and rows or some unspecified columns or rows. Excel is a lot quicker and a lot capable and a lot more efficient at handling pivot tables when the underlying data is a table itself. So now what I want you to do is now create your pivot table. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to select all 5 rows, all 5 columns, hold Control and Shift and press down, and then we're going to go insert and we're going to go pivot table. Now before that, you just one point of reference is that your table is actually called table 1. So remember that, because what you can do instead of doing that is you can just go insert pivot table and you can select table 1 as your reference. And now what we're going to do, so instead of highlighting all the columns and all the rows, you now just specify table 1 as your source of data. So this makes life a lot easier because we're going to update table 1, we can add to it, we can take it away. Excel knows exactly the target it's working with. We're now going to click new worksheet as an option. Basically what that means is the pivot table is going to be created on an entirely new worksheet, or you can specify the location. If you click this upward arrow, existing worksheet, you can then specify where you want it. So I can create a pivot table here if I wanted to, or here, it doesn't matter, but I don't want to do that. You can even change the name of your table. You can call it table 1 or create a new data source. But really what I want to do is click new worksheet and leave this table 1 as our source for the pivot table. So click OK at that. And we've now got the makings and the beginnings of our pivot table. Now, it doesn't give you a name, it just gives you sheet 1. So in my opinion, a good practice is to give it a name. So call it P table. You can call it P table 1 if you like, P table being short for pivot table. And then if you want, you can drag it to the right. So your data source is always on your furthest left and your pivot table is on your right. Another thing you can do is you can actually color your tabs. So this I might want to color red, and our data I might just want to color, I don't know, say blue. So what can we now do with our pivot table? In fact, what is a pivot table? A pivot table essentially is a grid. So think of something like this. Best example is a 2x2 grid. So this is a pivot table. If I just add, so this is a pivot table. It's a 2x2 grid, and what our, as you can see, my formatting is not correct here. But what this does is essentially gives us a tabular structure by which we can now control, frame, and populate data. And our tabular structure doesn't have to be 2x2. It could be any number of columns and any number of rows that you like. And I'll get into that in a bit more detail shortly. So what I want to do now, if we go back to our P table, is start populating this pivot. So remember I said we've got a 2x2 column. So if you remember, we've got 2 columns along and 2 rows down. This is essentially what we have here. So in our layout here, we've got, I'm just going to drag the screen out a bit. You've got 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. So for instance, if I take, let's take for instance, company name, I can put it in a rows. I can also put company name into columns, so that goes across the top. I can also put name into values, but what that does is it aggregates it. It gives us a sum of sorts. It gives us an aggregation. But what I really want to do is put it into rows. You can also put it into filters, but we'll come on to filters in a moment. So we're going to put it into rows. And now you can see we've got a list of all of our companies. So we've got 100 companies in here. And then you want to start bringing in more fields. So I might want to bring in industry. I might want to bring in rank as well, for instance. Now, by default, Excel wants to structure anything you put into rows in a vertical format. Now, if you wanted to, you could put industry into columns, but that makes your data table, your pivot table, really wide, as you can see. So what I like to do is I like to structure and format the pivot table a little bit. I'm just going to undo and undo a little bit here. Control Z, go back to our pivot, just the name value. I'm going to drag in industry and I'm going to drag in rank. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the format of this. So if you go into pivot table design, these are your layout. In terms of formatting this, we want to essentially go into design at the top here and click on blank rows. We want to make sure there's no blanks, although in our case there isn't any. Report layout. This is very key. So you want to click on tabular form, and that essentially starts to tidy up your data in a more tabular structure. You can turn on grand totals if you like. I'll just turn it off for now. And then subtotals, do not show subtotals. So now we've got the beginnings of something a bit more cleaner. So now you can see everything's on like a single tidy row. So you've got rank, you've got name for company, and you've got industries. Now with a pivot table, you can rearrange these. So I may want to, for instance, bring industries just below rank. So you can do that as well. You can center these, center align them, however you wish. I'm just going to drag industries back below name. Just going to move this along a little bit. And now we're going to add some numeric values. So what I want to do, before we do that, I want to add in country territory as well. So now we've got country territory in here, and then we can add employees. So what have we got here? We've got essentially the same pivot same style structure as we had on our original data source. So this is where pivot tables really require you to kind of think about what it is you're trying to achieve. So in this example here, what I want to do is I want to understand how many companies, let's just say how many employees are grouped under every single country. So I don't need company name, I don't need industries or rank. Let's just look at how many employees actually sit under each and every country. So to do that, I'm going to get rid of industry. I'm going to get rid of name. You can just left click and drag these away. I'm going to get rid of rank. And now your look and feel of the pivot table is completely changed. So by default, when you drag an item into values, it does a sum, which is what we need. We need to kind of sum it all up, add it all up together. Now these I want to tidy up a little bit, so you might want to highlight the values and click on this comma here, and that essentially adds a comma to your values. So every 1,000 will get a comma, and I want to reduce and get rid of the decimal places, so you can use this little shortcut here. So now I can see I've got a pivot table showing me a count of employees by every single country. And I want to sort this. So this is how you sort pivot tables. You click onto one of the fields here you want to sort by, and then you want to go to value filters. And what we want to do, is go more sort options. We want to do descending order by sum of employees and click OK. And that now ranks the biggest countries all the way through to the smallest countries. So now we can see we've got United States at the top, Austria all the way at the bottom. So this is a really quick pivot table. If I wanted to check which countries had the most number of employees, this is how I would do it. I would bring in the dimension that I want, or the field that I want, which is country territory, and then have a sum of employees. What if we wanted, for instance, an average number of employees per company? So per company, per country. So this is how we do that. We change the sum here. So you left click here and you go to value field settings. And now you can we've got a few choices. So we can do a count. That would give us a count of employees. Doesn't really make sense here, but we want more of an average. So an average sounds more like what we want, because we want to know what is the average number of employees per company, per country. So if we click OK to that, our values completely change. And now you can actually see in terms of ranking, India ranks number 1. So what that means is if we look at each and every single company within India, top employers within India, the average size is around 230,000 employees. And the US now is smaller, not significantly, but now has around 135,770. This is real data, guys. So this data is kind of reflective of actual results. So this data here isn't fake in any way. It's some actual real data taken and put together by the original publisher. So here I might want to now say I want to know a count of how many companies actually sit under every single country. So to do that, we could take the company name and do that as a count. So this is how we do it. We bring company name into values. I want to set it just to the left of the employee count. And now we have a number of companies for each individual country. Now, as you can see, India only has one value. So therefore, our average here is feeding from one company. And if we go back to our original data, you can actually see if we go to India, we filter this data here, you can see it's only Reliance Industries. You can actually see the data from pivot table. I'll show you how in a second. In the United States has 40 companies. So if I was to filter this data to United States, the original raw data that we did a pivot table from, you can now see these are the 40 companies. And you know that because if you sum these up, you'll get 40 out of 100 records. So that confirms the 40 companies. Now, what if you want to actually see the 17 companies in Germany without filtering your raw data table? Well, this is how you do it. So in a pivot table, one of the most coolest features is that you can double click into any of these values and it'll show you the raw data. In fact, it won't just take you back to the raw data table, it'll create a new table for you to explore. So I'll show you how you do that. So say I want to look at these 17 companies in Germany, all I've got to do is double click on the 17. And in doing so, it generates and creates a new table called Sheet 2. And now you can see those 17 companies in Germany. And these are the names. You can see the original. So it doesn't filter it in any way. You get everything basically. So you get the employee count, the country, the industries, the rank, and everything. This you can delete. It won't affect your pivot table, but in any way. So if I delete this now, it won't make a difference to the original pivot table. All right. So double clicking into a pivot table will expand it and create a new view just for you so you can actually see what data lies behind it. So if you were to share this with your boss, your colleague, anyone, a client even, and they wanted to explore this, they could just double click and actually see what values sit behind it. So I hope that helps. This is how you interact with a pivot table. There's more, guys. I mean, we can actually create a new formula using a pivot table, using our pivot table. And that requires a bit more advanced functionality. So what we do here is go to fields and create a calculated field. So this is how I would create a calculated field. You can create and specify and build your own formula to create your own custom field. That's one way to do it. I haven't got any examples with this data set, but I will show you in a future data set. Another way in which you can, if ever your window here on the right disappears, you just click field list and that will show you all the values. Another option is to potentially build formulas off of this. So for instance, you could do a sum formula. Now, the way you do it, you just click sum, highlight everything here, and that would give you a sum. Another way to do it is actually add a grand total. So you could go into design, grand totals, and you can turn it on just for columns. All right. So that's another way to do it. And this is an average, guys. So that's why you may not see. If we add total this up, we get 1.6 million. And the reason why we get 115,000 is because it's an average. It's taking the average number of employees from the top 100. We can actually turn that off. Let's turn that. Actually, let's leave it on. So we've got grand total here as well. And now something else you can do in terms of pivot tables is you can produce filters. So in terms of filters, guys, it really, again, think about the question you're trying to answer and the question you're trying to solve for. So if I take, for instance, let's for a moment remove country territory. Let's remove average number of employees. Let's remove everything. And what I want you to do is start again from scratch. We're going to bring in name and we're going to bring in employees. And by default, it's going to sum all the employees. And this is where you can add in, say, country territory into filters. So what that allows you to do, allows you to filter your data. So your filter options are set to country and territory, and the actual filter itself appears in the top left here. So here you can see you've got single values you can filter from. So for instance, I might want to filter on Singapore companies. It's only one company, which is DBS Bank. I might want to go to Germany, and you can see all the companies in Germany. If I want to be able to select multiple countries, you tick this box here, select multiple items. So now I can do Germany, France, and say UK. And now I can see all the countries, all the employees, all the countries. Now I can see all the companies that sit under these three countries. And if I actually wanted to see the country name beside it, I can drag country territory into rows as well. So not only have I got in filters, I can drag it into rows as well. And again, you can see the filter here. But what's happened is our filter option has disappeared. So the filter option is now embedded within this column here. All right. I'm gonna go back to having country territory at the top here. I'm gonna show you one last thing. This is really cool. I'm gonna show you a way to pivot your data using a slicer. So I want you to select into your pivot table, click insert and click slicer. So this essentially is another way to filter your data. I want to do the same thing here. I want to filter by country territory and click OK. And what that now does is it gives you a box. This is this is like a handy floating box which you can drag and move around, and you can use this to select and filter your data. So here you can see as I'm moving through the country, our pivot table is changing. If you select clear filter, it gives you everything. If you select multi-select, it allows you to select different values. So for instance, I just want a single value, again, Canada. Click multi-select. I want China, France, and Germany. All right. It's a really powerful way to use slices. Slices are really cool, especially when you have dashboards and Excel-based dashboards where pivot tables are used in the background of your dashboard. So we'll come on to slices in future. Another really cool and probably the last one of the last components I'll show you here is to add a visualization. So if you click insert whilst you've got your pivot table selected, instead of going recommended chart, you go to pivot chart. You can now say I want to select a column chart here, and now it gives you a visual for all the values selected in your pivot table. And as you remove through your slicer, say I want to see all the companies in China, you can see the pivot chart automatically updates as you move through your slicer, and your pivot table automatically adjusts. So this is another cool way to explore your data. Using a pivot table, a slicer, and a pivot chart, you can really produce some magic here. And then guys, last point is on the formatting. So if you were to go to design, you can actually change the color, look and feel of your pivot table. You can format these charts, format these slices as well in much the same way. Entirely up to you. You can format the shape, the size, however you like. So hope that's been interesting. So guys, one last thing to show you is that you can actually export your pivot table into a PowerPoint. So if I just take these values here, open up a new PowerPoint file, I can now paste this and then paste it as a picture or as a destination style, and that then allows us to kind of maintain and play with our formatting. You can actually insert new rows, columns, however you like. Although you can't actually embed and play with the data within PowerPoint, at least you're able to kind of move it into a visual format. So I can now do this, and then I can add some annotation to this and share this with my colleagues or my manager, for instance. So guys, in a nutshell, that's a pivot table. Hope you found it useful, and I hope the pivot tables really become a useful feature and function for you if you want to become a more effective and skilled data analyst. Learning pivot tables is more or less an essential requirement. There's a lot more you can do with pivot tables. I've just touched most of the surface here, but do follow in a future video. We'll cover more on pivot tables, including how you can build a dashboard using pivot tables and using a series of slices and pivot charts. We can create a really meaningful dashboard entirely in Excel. Guys, hope you've enjoyed the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next one.